Peter. Welcome, Katie, and everyone. In 1963, the Sierra Club published a book called The Place No One Knew that profoundly affected the collective conscience of Americans. It was a eulogy to Glen Canyon, one of the most beautiful, ecologically rich landscapes in the Southwest. While Katie Lee knew Glen Canyon painfully well, most Americans only knew of the iconic Grand Canyon just downriver and had no idea what was about to be lost. The book documented what would soon be buried by the West's insatiable thirst for economic development. The landscape pictured was unlike anything most Americans had ever seen. It was rich with tight slick rock slot canyons, rippling with yellow light, vibrantly green hanging gardens clinging to orange sandstone, and ancient petroglyphs carved into varnished walls. And with every picture was the constant reminder that it was all in the process of being destroyed. Sierra Club Executive Director David Brower wrote in the book's introduction, "Glen Canyon died in 1963, and I was partly responsible for its needless death. So were you. Neither you, nor I, nor anyone else knew it well enough to insist that at all cost it should endure. When we began to find out, it was too late." Brower used the destruction of Glen Canyon to effectively stop the construction of 2 dams proposed in 1963 for Grand Canyon. The loss of Glen Canyon helped save Grand Canyon and also soon came to represent much more than an inundated 300 square mile drainage in a remote corner of the Southwest. The 710-foot high dam, along with the stunning blue lake it created, became a symbol for conservationists of all that was wrong with the modern American West. Edward Abbey succinctly summed up the opposition during a 1981 speech atop Glen Canyon Dam, when the founding members of Earth First unfurled a crack down the concrete monolith. "Surely," he proclaimed, "no man-made structure in modern American history has been hated so much by so many for so long with such good reason." As other environmental fights have ebbed and flowed, the loss of Glen Canyon remains a cause célèbre, a battle cry like no other. However, Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Powell have also become symbols of a very different perspective toward nature and what makes for a good life in the modern American West. What environmentalists like Brower and Abbey loathed was and continues to be dearly loved by others. Steve Ward, a lifelong Page resident and spokesman for Aramark, said in a recent Arizona Daily Sun article, "I have deep fondness for the lake, and I would expend all of my energies to protect it." The 50-year debate over the dam has not been simply a disagreement about a place, but about a way of life. Dams are a functional symbol of society for many people, observes water policy expert Daniel McCool. It means progress, stability, and economic growth. It stands for everything that side of apple pie. Glen Canyon Dam was the Bureau of Reclamation's last big dam and marked the end of the agency's empire-building phase. It was one of 6 dams along the Colorado River's 1,400-mile course that comprises a reservoir-based water infrastructure serving 30 million people in the West. The water is released from these reservoirs in conveyor belt fashion, with Denver and Salt Lake City drawing their allotment from the Colorado's mountain drainages above Lake Powell. The thirsty desert meccas of Phoenix, Las Vegas, San Diego, and Los Angeles, along with Southern California's massive agricultural irrigation districts, draw their legal allotment from Lake Mead and other reservoirs downstream. Despite the common misconception that Lake Powell is a lifeline to desert metropolitan areas, no water is drawn directly from the reservoir, except for the relatively small amount that goes to the community of Page and the cooling towers at the nearby coal-fired Navajo generating station. As such, Lake Powell exists primarily as a holding tank, a bathtub in the desert for the upper basin states. Growing up in the 1960s and 1970s, when Lake Powell was filling, I never questioned the existence of the West's massive reservoirs. I reasoned that the destruction of Glen Canyon was collateral damage for nothing less than the comfortable Southwest lifestyle I enjoy. Yet the trade-off always seemed bittersweet at best. I wished I could have explored the twisting slot canyons, paddled the lazy river, and seen the intact Anasazi ruins for myself. but I was born too late. At least that is what I thought until drought and climate change kicked in. In 2002, I began covering the retreat of Lake Powell and surprise reemergence of Glen Canyon for Backpacker magazine. What started as a one-story assignment investigating new hiking destinations turned into a life-changing journey. My expedition took me into the most beautiful places that were supposed to have been forever destroyed. And it also led me to investigate the agribusiness industry, federal water subsidies, Native American cultural sites, Grand Canyon ecology, suburban sprawl, public lands recreation, tourism, and all the underpinnings of the West's economic machine. In the summer of 2005, I was fortuitously paired on a Glen Canyon story assignment with the talented landscape photographer James Kay. We sat on the shores of the shrinking reservoir and talked about how we were impacted by the beauty we were witnessing in Glen Canyon. And we also talked about the larger meaning of what we were seeing. From these early conversations, our book Resurrection was born. Now I'd like to turn it over to my partner in this project, James Kay.
Thank you, Annette, and thank you, Helen and Peter, for helping to organize, or actually organizing this event. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming this evening. I flew down from Salt Lake City today, and as many of you are aware, that's quite a beautiful flight, Zion, Bryce, and the Grand Canyon. And I'm happy to report when I flew over the Grand Canyon that there are still no dams and no reservoirs, much to the chagrin of Floyd Dominy, then director of the Bureau of Reclamation, as some of us call it. And I actually learned that just last night that Mr. Dominy's 100th birthday will be this year. And I thought this would be a good opportunity maybe to ask Katie if she just picked out a birthday present yet for Mr. Dominy. Anyhow, it's a pleasure to be back in Flagstaff and at the beautiful NAU campus. The last time I gave this presentation, I asked if anybody in the audience had been fortunate enough to have floated the length of the Colorado River through Glen Canyon before the dam. And nobody raised their hands. But tonight, I know at least one hand would go up. Are there any others? So I guess the dainty hand of Katie Lee will be the only one. And Katie was a member, or still a member, I guess, of one of the most exclusive clubs in the world. A club which we'd all like to join, but have been denied membership in. When I first arrived in Utah in 1972, I had never heard of Glen Canyon. By the time I first laid eyes on Lake Powell in the late 70s, from the deck of a houseboat, the reservoir was nearly full. And most of Glen Canyon was already submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water. At that point in time, I had no idea what lay beneath the waves as we motored along the reservoir surface. I soon discovered that several friends on that trip had actually hiked in this place called Glen Canyon back in the early 60s as the reservoir was still filling. They told me stories about the things they had seen. Intrigued by their accounts, as soon as I returned home from that trip, I began to search out every book I could find which contained stories and photographs of these mysterious lost canyons. From the journals of John Wesley Powell to more recent books such as David Brower's The Place No One Knew, these manuscripts all portrayed Glen Canyon as the most inspiring parcel of country along the entire length of the Colorado River. I soon came to the realization that the reservoir was really a graveyard, and in my mind, a very sad place. The harsh reality of what had been lost by the flooding of Glen Canyon began to sink in, and I simply accepted the fact that Glen was forever beyond my reach. Or so I thought until early 2003, when after several years of drought, the water level of Lake Powell had dropped by nearly 100 feet. So in the spring of that year, I began a journey to photograph the reemerging canyons. In the beginning, I found some filled wall to wall with deep layers of reservoir sediment. Other, more narrow canyons had already been scoured clean by recent flash floods, right down to their pre-reservoir beds. I compared old photographs to what I was seeing and was astonished at the similarity. In